This episode is one of the most requested subject matters that I have ever received. It seems that lately this is the topic of conversation, menopause. And it's such an interesting topic because although it does affect just one gender, being females, it is widely misunderstood by males and females. This conversation, I feel, needed to happen. It needed to happen now because I, over the last couple of weeks, have posted several different things and spoken heavily with my own clientele about this very thing. What I have noticed is there are two schools of people when it comes to menopause. There are the people that understand from a mechanistic level, what is actually going on in their own physiology and their own psychology, because there is a psychological component to menopause as well. And then there is others, or are others, that obviously suffer the symptoms. And if you are a female, you will go through this regardless, who don't quite understand how menopause works from a mechanistic perspective. And the challenge with that is not that you need to know everything down to the cellular level, and it's certainly not where we're going to go completely, but we are going to touch on things in this episode. But the challenge with that is if you don't understand what's going on, you are then subject to the outcome. But you don't understand what is creating the outcome. I have hot flushes. I am storing more body fat than normal. I am losing lean tissue. I am insert whatever the issue might be. But if you don't understand why this is occurring, it's very, very difficult to be able to comprehend, well, what can I do about it? Which is the biggest challenge. And now this episode I'm doing predominantly for my own clientele. This is the episode that I've been asked to do for the last 10 days or so. This needs to be spoken about. I need to know more about this. And just for context, why believe me? Why listen to me? And the truth is, you should always do your own research. You should always listen to an opinion of an individual, take it with a grain of salt, and then do your own research off the back of that. So a bit of context of me. I've been in the health and fitness industry working one-on-one with clients for the past 15 years, that is males and females. However, predominantly, my clientele basis has been in the 45 to 65 age range of the last 15 years. I don't know why that's happened, but that just happens to be the case. So I have seen from a clinical perspective the ups and downs, the successes and failures of people going through this very period of time. And what's interesting is the very people that need help the most, the ones that are actually struggling the most, are willing to listen. They are the ones that are understanding, hey, I know this is the process that I'm going through. I just need help navigating this, and I'm open to listening. So what we're going to do here is look at things through a coach's perspective. I am not a gynecologist or an OBGYN. I am a coach who has a lot of clinical practice working with women through this period of time. So it is my hope that I can do a few things. I can allow you to understand the fundamentals. What is menopause? The cellular mechanisms behind it, why fat increases and shifts to belly, and why muscle tissues decline. I'm hoping that we can go into some of the popular myths and misconceptions, why they're wrong, and the real science behind them. And then also mainly what to do. What to do. And I would urge anyone that is listening to this that is going through menopause, that is struggling, whether it is perimenopause or even postmenopause, and is struggling with a multitude of issues, whether it is in sudden increases in body fat, whether that is feeling not quite right, not feeling quite like yourself, because your physiology is changing so much. I would urge you to just listen, to try to understand, to look at things from a different perspective. Because oftentimes what I find, especially with this, and it's the same thing with men, and specifically when we're looking at how testosterone impacts rates of muscle growth, we get so dogmatic with our beliefs that we refuse, especially if that refusal is coming from someone's perspective who goes against our own beliefs. And that is not certainly just in this subject matter, that is in many different subject matters. So what I am hoping that we can do is open conversation up. Challenge me on things as I would you, so that we can hopefully come to understand this much more. And this goes to any subject matter. This is not just menopause. We just happen to be talking about menopause in this particular episode. So without further ado, let's jump right into things. The fundamentals, what is it? 3 words, 3 different things. And most people, including a lot of media coverage, use them interchangeably. Perimenopause is the run-up. It is the years, typically 4 to 7 years, where your cycle starts changing and your hormones swing unpredictably before your period stops for good. Menopause is not a phase. It's one kind of specific day that confirmed only in hindsight, defined as 12 consecutive months without a period. Once those 12 consecutive months without a period have occurred, menopause has occurred. And then postmenopause. Postmenopause essentially is everything after that day for the rest of your life. This tiering stages system is internationally agreed upon as the standard used by menopause researchers worldwide. A 2022 review checking over 200 published studies against it found that researchers themselves often define these stages inconsistently, which is a genuine part of why online advice conflicts them so much. This episode is not designed as this is the be all and end all. This is simply a conversation about this particular subject matter to allow the listener to understand things a little more, a little deeper, and from another person's perspective that has spent 15 years working in this space one-on-one with females going through this period. Let's start with the mechanism. Why this happens at a cellular level. And I'm going to try and keep things as simple as I possibly can so that we don't associate so much with just hormones, because it is far more than that. Yes, there are going to be significant hormonal changes, and one of the biggest misconceptions, which we'll get to, is my hormones have changed, I can't now make progress. During perimenopause, estrogen doesn't decline in a straight line. It kind of swings. Sometimes it's higher some days and sometimes it's lower other days, unpredictably. The follicle stimulating hormone, otherwise known as FSH, is the brain signal trying to get a response from the ovaries. Essentially, it climbs as that response gets less reliable. There was a 2025 review explaining the clearest example of this mechanism in action. Hot flashes, a cluster of cells in the hypothalamus in the brain's temperature control center, is normally kept in check by estrogen. When estrogen drops, those cells misfire and sell you a false signal of you're overheating. So core temperature starts to increase, producing the sudden heat and sweating of a hot flash. None of this is random. This is a very specific, identifiable mechanism behind it. Even where the mechanism gets genuinely really complex, the same is true for 2 changes at the center of this episode. Why fat increases and moves to the belly and why muscle tissue declines. Both have real receptor level explanations. So let's start with why fat increases, why body fat increases, adipose tissue increases, and specifically shifts to the belly. Fat cells essentially have their own docking systems for estrogen. They're called estrogen receptors, and they sit in higher numbers in some fat depots than others. 2 specific mechanisms explain the shift towards the abdomen. First is the enzyme called lipoprotein lipase, whose job essentially is to pull fat out of the bloodstream and lock it away into fat cells for extra energy storage. Estrogen normally suppresses this enzyme's ability to specifically, in the visceral abdominal area, it keeps a brake on belly fat storage. It doesn't want all the energy to just go to that particular area. Now, when estrogen drops, that brake comes off in the visceral region, and fat storage starts to increase around there. Second, at the receptor level, the active estrogen signaling normally helps convert inert energy storing white fat into more metabolically active form that burns energy as heat. It also boosts fat oxidation generally. With less estrogen doing its job, more fat sits as passive storage rather than being burned as fuel. And it's the abdominal depot where this shows up most, because that's where the receptor and the enzyme changes are really concentrated. So that's what happens. That's why, from a, hey, why am I storing it around here? Estrogen starts to lower a little bit. It increases the likelihood you're going to store fat around that visceral area. Why does lean muscle tissue start to decrease? Muscle also has its own estrogen receptors. And this isn't limited to the reproductive tissue. Estrogen does 3 specific jobs for muscle that a 2024 review lays out in detail. All reviews, by the way, are going to be linked below. First, it activates satellite cells, the resident repair crew stem cells that rebuild muscle fiber after everyday wear and tear, including the microscopic damage from exercise. Remember, when we exercise, we create these little microscopic damages. Our body takes the nutrients that we are consuming through our diet and uses those nutrients to repair that tissue. With less estrogen, this quote-unquote repair crew is switched on less effectively. So muscle rebuilds more slowly and less completely. Secondly, estrogen also supports mitochondria. Mitochondria essentially is the powerhouse of the cell, is the energy generating structures inside your muscle cell. As estrogen drops, mitochondrial function declines, making muscle cells less energetically efficient. Third, lastly, estrogen influences the balance between the genes that build muscle protein and the genes that break it down. So we've got muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. None of these 3 mechanisms individually cause dramatic muscle loss overnight, but together and sustained over years, remember, going through perimenopause, it's a sustained period of time over years, they explain why lean tissue trends downward in this direction. So what does this do to body composition? Where we're storing fat, building muscle, how we're physically looking. One of the studies we're going to go through is the SWAN study. The SWAN study essentially is the acronym for the study of women's health across the nation, is the largest and longest running data set on this exact question. Over 3,000 women tracked up for 18 years during this study. So it's got very, very, very comprehensive data. And it wasn't just, which we'll touch on in a minute, it wasn't just one culture. It was Chinese women, it was African American women, it was quote unquote American or white Caucasian women. There was a lot of different cultures and subsets that went into that. So let's go through a couple of the main findings, which are going to be probably quite interesting. There's a specific 2-year hinge point, and it's really before your last period, not after. About 2 years before the final menstrual period, the rate of fat gain can double, and lean muscle mass, which has been stable, starts to actively decline. Both trends continue for roughly around 4 years in total, 2 years prior, and then 2 years after the final period. And then it kind of completely flattens out as you don't get a period anymore. The scale can also lie to you completely. The SWAN study found that overall weight gain doesn't actually change at the start of this window because the fat being gained and the muscle being lost roughly offset each other on a physical scale. So you can be in the middle of a real significant change in body composition, but see almost nothing on the scale. The average numbers hide huge individual variation. On average, women lost a modest 0.7% of lean mass and gained 6% of fat mass during this window. But 1 in 4 women lost 4.7% or more of their lean mass, and 1 in 4 gained 9% or more of fat mass. This is a meaningful minority experience and a substantially bigger shift, so it's worth taking into account. The pattern is not universal across every woman. Genuine variation does exist. The SWAN's multi-ethnic design showed white and black women had similar patterns of fat gain and lean loss. But Japanese participants, for example, lost lean mass without gaining fat. Chinese participants actually gained lean mass and lost fat after menopause. So the body composition story here is that we have a strong average pattern, not a biological guarantee for every single individual. So when someone says, I'm going through menopause, I am struggling with this, so you're probably going to, it's likely that that isn't true. This window has downstream consequences. Following up on the SWAN research found that women who lost more lean mass and gained more fat during this specific window had lower bone density and higher fracture risk. When you start to decrease lean muscle tissue and bone density decreases too, you increase the likelihood of osteoporosis, brittle bone disease. Not that it's specific that needs to get to that level, but bones become more brittle over time. A couple of the misconceptions we're going to delve into. This is where the popular narrative goes wrong in 2 opposite directions. Either your hormones have ruined everything. Give up on the old approach entirely, or menopause is nothing, just eat less. Let's just carry on. First myth, hormones make it impossible to lose fat or build muscle after menopause. The science, this is the doom and gloom version, and it's not supposed to buy trial data. The 2023 meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials found resistance training reliably improved menopausal symptoms and functional capacity in postmenopausal women. A 2024 12-week trial found that postmenopausal women doing resistance training plus a high-protein diet outperformed training alone, protein alone, or neither, on muscle thickness and strength. A separate 20-week trial found real measurable body composition changes in postmenopausal women doing the same training program as premenopausal women. Hormones do make this harder. As we spoke about earlier, the lower estrogen levels do store fat around viscerally and decrease your lean tissue gains. However, it doesn't make it impossible. Multiple randomized controlled trials confirm that fat loss and muscle building are still achievable. A way to think about this on a practical level is if you've known anyone that is in that age range that is going through menopause that has been able to still either stay in great shape or even get in shape going through that period, then it means that your preconceived notions of like, I'm going through menopause, I'm fucked. I'm going through menopause, my hormones are all out, like I can't achieve something, is flawed. It is not a black and white system. There is no, hey, this is the way that it is. It doesn't exist. And I know that sometimes that can hurt your feelings, but the science shows that that's just not true, which you should see as a fucking good thing. And more so than the science, practically and anecdotally and from a clinical perspective, doing this for such a long time, I know that it's not true. Again, see that as a benefit. If you know that there may be something outside of what you're doing, or there may be a reason that you're not achieving the results, know that you have to change the protocol. Doesn't mean that it's not hard, but it's hard anyway, regardless if you're going through menopause or not. The next myth is that menopause tanks your metabolism. This is contested in research, which is worth saying openly rather than try to pick a side. Again, this episode is not a for or against. It is, here are the facts. Not my opinion, but facts through actual data, actual studies. And when we're talking about actual studies, one of the interesting things is that it is a useful skill being able to actually read a study, not just ask AI, not just ask Google, but actually be able to go into a study and read it. Most people won't. In fact, I think a large majority won't, because trying to read a study is actually really fucking hard. If that's not your jam either, it's boring as hell. It really is. Most people go in and read an abstract. They'll go to PubMed or a website similar, and they'll just read the abstract or the summary, but they will forget to read why that is the way that it is. And if you don't do that, you're not understanding the study. A large study spanned over 6,000 people found that total energy expenditure adjusted for body size stays essentially flat from ages 20 to 60. A separate study focused specifically on women found that age, not menopause itself, predicted the decline in resting energy expenditure. Estrogen and the FSH hormone levels weren't linked to it at all. Your metabolism, therefore, likely does slow with age. Whether menopause adds a little sprinkle on top is unresolved. But the popular claim that menopause alone breaks your metabolism wildly overstates what any evidence currently shows. Any evidence. What likely happens during this period of time, this is what the Swan study did a good job in showing, is that your lifestyle changes, your environment changes. Things are no longer the way that they used to be. Your behaviors and your actions are usually very, very different. Even if, for example, you used to train 4 times a week when you were in your 20s and you're training 4 times a week right now and you're in your 50s or 60s, the intensity is probably wildly different. Your lifestyle is probably wildly different. You may not be able to train as hard. You may not be able to recover quite as well. And obviously with the fact that going through menopause lowers estrogen levels and all the other hormonal shifts that happens, this does make things different. Next myth, if the scale isn't moving, nothing is happening. Swan directly disproves this. Total weight gain rate doesn't actually change at the start of your menopause transition because fat gain and muscle loss roughly cancel out each other on a scale, so your weight will stay relatively stable. A flat scale reading can't sit on top of a real meaningful shift in body composition. This is a measurement problem, not a discipline problem. The fix really is to track things like waist measurements or even a strength number. For example, we monitor strength numbers because it has a direct correlation with building tissue and reducing risk of things like osteoporosis or brittle bone disease in any way, shape, or form. Next, with hormone replacement will give you back your old body. A 2022 meta-analysis pooling multiple clinical trials found hormone therapy compared with the placebo produced a real but modest increase in lean mass and decrease in fat mass. But the same analysis found exercise alone reduced fat mass by roughly twice as much as hormone therapy alone. And it's the combination of the two that outperformed each other individually. Hormone therapy is a legitimate decision on real merits, symptoms, bone health, quality of life, all that sort of stuff. But it was never a substitute for resistance training. And that's the thing that people forget, is that now I'm in this period of time, I stop doing things that I used to, or I stop doing things that are going to be advantageous to my progress, being building muscle tissue through resistance training. Now, we've touched on a few things there, and I kind of want to try to summarize this the best I can. Going through menopause, whether it is peri-menopause or post, is fucking hard. And I really do feel for you. I've had multiple conversations of being sat in the fitness consultation room and a woman breaking down because she feels she just can't get on top of it. Because it affects many different areas of your life. Not just the way you feel, the way you think. Hot flashes are a fucking nightmare. But the relationships you have around you, the environment you have around you, you get yourself into a position, especially from an environmental standpoint, where you feel, I can't get out of this and I can't change this. But that's not the truth. The truth is you absolutely can. It's just going to take doing something different than what you currently are doing. And with the people that I've worked with over the years, the things that I've found with the people that are successful and that are not with this journey is the people that generally are unsuccessful with it have very black and white decision-making thoughts, as in, this is the way I believe it is, so this is the way I believe it is. I'm unwilling to be wrong. I'm unwilling to look at something from a different angle. I don't like what you said because it offended me, even though it might be the truth. So therefore, fuck you, fuck the hormones, fuck everything. I'm not doing anything about it. Or a variation of that. But what I've also found is the people that actually do succeed, and this is probably the most things in life, is the people that bitch and moan about things and don't actually do anything to change it are the ones that don't achieve results. This is regardless of menopause or not. The people that are open to go, you know what, I'm going through this, whether it's menopause, being diabetic, being obese, being, as we spoke a couple of episodes ago, going through any mental health disorders or eating disorders such as bulimia, anorexia. The people that achieve something, the people that are able to actually change, are able to change their mind. They're able to say, what I am currently doing isn't serving me, so therefore I am open to changing my mind. Let me dig deeper. Let me delve into this. Let me go see my GP. A large percent of the clientele that I work with right now, around 90%, are general practitioners. I've had this conversation hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times just this year alone, because most of the people that I work with are your doctor. And for some of you listening, I know they are your doctor, which is insane to think. But it's the very people that you need to speak with to be able to understand them. And I've had this ability to be able to have these conversations with these people just by enlarging them being my clientele. To understand this at the deepest possible level. The deepest possible level. I have GPs, I have OBGYNs, I have gynecologists as clients. So when I have these conversations with them, it is never a case of, hey, here's what I need you to do. Because I said to it, it is, let me understand what is going on with you so that together and practically we can create some strategies and structures to help you keep making progress. So if you are struggling right now, I hope that the next section is going to be for you. And that's part 3, what to do. The practical, data-backed and clinically backed action. Now you can do something about this, or you don't have to. But the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And that means you might be insane. And that's okay. Because that doesn't affect me in any way, shape, or form. It doesn't affect my clientele in any way, shape, or form. Because these are largely people, and not everybody, not everyone, by the way, but a large cohort of people that are willing to go, let me just give this a shot. Let me just try. So given a couple of these data points that we've gone through, given Swan's finding, specifically finding that weight gain can actually stay flat while fat rises and muscle falls, use a couple of numbers, monitor other things outside of just body composition, monitor things like, what is my waist measurement doing? What is my training like? Am I progressively getting stronger? And if I'm progressively getting stronger, and I'm still eating well, I'm making progress, especially when it comes to how your clothes are fitting. A big part of when you're trying to improve body composition goals is that when you're going through menopause at any stage, it doesn't change the law of thermodynamics. You still, in some way, shape, or form, need to be in an energy deficit or a caloric deficit. That still must occur. It still must occur. Now, menopause may affect the percentage of deficit you're in. You may have to go from a 15% to a 17 or a 20 or a 25% potentially, but it doesn't change that you need to be in a deficit to lose body fat. Likewise, if you were going to go to maintenance, likewise, if you're going to go into some kind of surplus, those things still need to occur. Make protein a non-negotiable at every meal, every main meal at least. The 2025 survey of resistance-trained women found that postmenopausal women eating meaningfully less protein relative to body weight than premenopausal women at exactly the stage of life where research says it needs to support the most. One of the single most fixes that you can do in order to sustain tissue is to give your body a reason to sustain muscle tissue, and that is consuming enough protein. Depending on what literature you read, anywhere from the 1.4 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight spread across the day. Resistance training is essential. Multiple randomized controls trials confirm resistance training reliably improves body composition, strength, and function in postmenopausal women. And it works even better when it's paired with adequate protein. The steepest body composition changes run for about 4 years as you're going through menopause. 2 years either side of the final period, and then it goes into a little bit of a plateau. So know there's an endpoint. Know there's an endpoint to the steepest part of how this changes, how you feel of pushing through this. Hormones make this harder. They do. The data is equally clear that harder is not the same as impossible. Again, if one person you know or have seen that is around your age range, that has achieved something that you want, then you can do it too. And the same research that we've gone through, again, all citations are going to be in the show notes, document that real physiological shifts in your hormones are not a predictor of your success or failure on this journey. I hope that just by listening to this, it gives you hope. I hope that you can listen back, share this with someone who may need to hear it, share this with someone just to change their perspective and say, hey, look, I've listened to this. I found it interesting enough. I'm going to share it with you just to get a different perspective. Because most of your perspectives may be in, this is the real. This is the real of people think they read scientific literature, but from what I have found is that's mostly bullshit. Because I have had several conversations this year alone to challenge the scientific literature that they have mentioned. and the conversation goes sideways real quick because they've not read it. If you are going to say things like read the research, read the studies, actually read them, because there are people like myself, amongst others. One of the reasons I love Dr. Lane Norton so much is when he calls people out for their bullshit is when people mention something, he will go and read that paper and then disprove it really, really quickly. And it is very clear that this person has just read the abstract. If you're going to cite scientific literature, read scientific fucking literature. And now, there's something I learned a long time ago from a sports scientist. When you're looking at, I'm pretty sure it's Dr. Eric Tretzler. I don't know, it's some wicked smart guy. When you're looking at scientific literature, the way to read it is not to read one paper. It is to read one paper and compare it to another opposing paper, something that challenges the thoughts of each other. Then it is to bring in a third paper that challenges both of those thoughts. If you can read studies of studies, if you can read randomized controlled trials, if you can read a multitude of papers and then start to combine those thoughts in together, you'll start to have a deeper understanding of the science. There is no surprise why the top performing scientists in their fields, when you ask them a very, very simple question, they say, it depends. And then they will lay out context for you. Because oftentimes, shit's real fucking confusing and things change every single day. And it's really difficult to be able to be in a belief system even 6 months ago than it is right now. So what I would urge you to do is, if you're going to cite scientific literature, read the fucking literature. If you aren't going to, don't say anything. Because there are people, again, like myself, like Dr. Lane Norton, like other people in the space that are way smarter than me, that will go and dig deep and go, what you've just said is wrong. And here is why. And this is never a case of like, and now you're a fucking idiot. Although some people definitely are. It is a case of, if you have a belief system around something, especially as it pertains to science, you will share that opinion with many other people. And it is an opinion. It is not a scientific fact. And what you're doing is spreading a narrative. And that narrative is incorrect, it is negative, and it can be destructive for other people as well. So instead of that, don't do that. It's like don't say mean things to people, because then they'll feel bad and they'll spread mean things to other people because you've made them feel mean, because you weren't able to be able to put your hand up and say, I'm just being an asshole. If there's anything I think you can take away from this episode is, there is hope. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Be brave. Be okay with asking for help. First and foremost, the person you should ask for help, if you are struggling, is your GP. Go to your GP and ask them and say, hey, I'm struggling with these things during this period of my life. Can you help? Because that is what they're there for. I hope you enjoy.